Legacy Storm deck is oftentimes counting to 10, just trying to get that damage in. Modern Storm is very different. When this deck goes off, it goes off big. It can usually cast its entire deck, or, you know, and counting to 20 is not too much of an issue.
Right. And this is not surprising to see Kurt Spiess go to this kind of strategy. He is a former Legacy Open champion here in Baltimore with lands. And this is probably the closest analog to lands in the format.
And you see the two big payoff, or I guess the three payoff cards in Storm are Goblin Electromancer, Pyromancer Ascension, and Past in Flames. And behind that, you really just have this shell of all cantrips. You see Shrout's going to go ahead and start out on Sleight of Hand, puts Past in Flames on the bottom. He does have Electromancer and Ascension in his hand. And Kurt showing his hand pretty much now with Island to go with his Urza's Mine.
The cat is not completely out of the bag, because sometimes you see these Tron decks as just a blue-white shell. So not a giveaway yet that Kurt's on green, but the cat is out of the bag. It's some sort of blue Tron strategy.
Yeah, and with that, Shrout knows, I would imagine he knows that his turn 2 plays are fairly safe right now. Tron doesn't have much removal. And one of the scary things about the Storm deck is it actually can turn 3 combo more than a lot of the combo decks in the format. And the way it does that is if it gets an unchecked Electromancer, the deck becomes very unfair.
Yep. Cards like Metamorpho start generating mana, and you can go pretty crazy from there.
Yeah, you're going to see Shrout go for that, knowing that Tron is bad at killing this. You know, so the Storm has speed with this card. What it sacrifices is that this is pretty disruptible, right? It's a 2/2 creature for 2. There's a lot of ways to break this up.
Tons of lightning bolts in the format. I mean, they're all over the place, even in combo decks. Yeah. But this is one of the matchups where it's just in the clear.
Right, and I would say because, yeah, Kurt's going to go ahead and remand that, so that'll keep him alive for a bit. Generally, if the Storm player gets untapped with that, he will have a win on the next turn. And second Tron piece for Kurt, that's going to be the power plant. So with that Expedition map, he will have Tron next turn. You do see one of his payoffs there. He does have Ugin the Spirit Dragon in his hand.
So something to keep in mind here is that there's Empty the Warrens kills in these decks, and there's Past in Flames kills in these decks. Because Kurt can control the board with things like Oblivion Stone and Ugin, has to be through burning out. It's going to be much harder to try to just dump a bunch of tokens into play and win that way.
Yeah, game 1, Shrout's all in on the Grape Shot plan. The sideboard plan is where you would find Empty the Warrens. Now, interestingly, he's running 3 copies of Gifts Ungiven in his main deck right now, which actually means, we'll get to that in a sec, he does have a Transform sideboard that is going to be available to him.
But now the Electromancer is no good in Shrout's hand, because Kurt has the ability to break an Expedition map, get his last Tron piece, cast Ugin, and bolt it. So
yeah, well, it's not entirely no good. There's a chance here if you see, depending on what that Shrout could combo this turn, starting with Electromancer, he does have a Pyretic Ritual and a Manamorphose. So he may be able to play it and then just start right away.
Right. What I mean is that Shrout's setup turn of cast Electromancer, pass, now untap and go crazy, that's not something that Shrout can do. So yes, it can be valuable from the perspective of it can actually be generating mana for you and make your go-off turn a little bit more efficient. But I think that Shrout was hoping that he could just have an unchecked Electromancer go into his next turn and go crazy. He can't do that anymore.
Yeah, he's going to have to cast it on his combo turn. That said, interestingly, Ugin doesn't... Like, Shrout can let Kurt resolve Ugin, and that's fine. Maybe the overloaded Cyclonic Rift is maybe more problematic. Though even then, Kurt isn't putting the pressure on Shrout at the moment to combo him.
Exactly. Now, something that is in Kurt's deck, something to be mindful of, is 2 copies of Mindslaver. And if that ever resolves and happens, that's probably going to be the end of the line for Shrout. But a lot of his other big payoff cards don't guarantee a win.
And I really like what Andrew's doing here. What he's doing is he's playing Pyromancer Ascension and casting Sleight of Hand to put a counter on it. This will likely... unless Kurt Cyclonic Rifts it on end step, this will force Kurt to play Ugin and destroy the Ascension. And I don't think Andrew's actually planning to go off with Ascension. He's just trying to buy a turn so he can set up for an Electromancer kill next turn.
Right, but it also sort of forces Kurt's hand, because I don't think that Kurt can just say, okay, you have Pyromancer's Ascension. That's also very dangerous.
Right, no, he has to play the Ugin and blow up this Ascension.
Yeah. This is a very good test spell from Shrout, as you mentioned, though, because he might not need it to win the game, but from Kurt's side of the table, he can't just let this hang out. And he has nothing else to really do with his resources this turn anyway other than cast Ugin, so...
Yeah, if Kurt leaves this on the table, Shrout will certainly win next turn. See, Repeal, also in Kurt's hand. has that as an option. Repeal, Ugin, Cyclonic Rift. Choked on blue mana, however, so he only gets to pick one of those spells.
Now, repeal does make things a bit more complicated because it does allow Kurt to simply repeal. He doesn't have to tap out this turn to play the Ugin and hope that Shrout either, he gets a better spot to cast Ugin somewhere down the line. He also probably doesn't want to lose his Expedition map at this stage.
Yeah, as Oblivion Stone as well. He could cast Oblivion Stone and leave up the repeal as well. So you could have maybe both.
Yeah, so the repeal puts Kurt in a position now where he doesn't have to pull the trigger on Ugin. He has a little bit of flexibility. And if it turns out that this Pyromancer's Ascension is just a trap to induce the Ugin, he can say, okay, we'll do it the other way. And I think that's where Kurt's at.
Well, he's seen the Electromancer. And if you know, I think he respects the Electromancer enough to know that he probably just can't tap out here.
Yep.
So does play Oblivion Stone, leaves up blue mana for repeal, and does have the 5 mana to crack Oblivion Stone if that need arises.
It's a very valuable thing to have access to mid-combo on the other side of the table.
Yeah, and if you look at Andrew's hand, Goblin Electromancer, Pyretic Ritual, 2 mana Morphoses, and a Grape Shot. It is looking like he will have the combo if he goes unchecked. It's gonna start just on a mana Morphos. Cycle 1 off.
But this is mean for the moment that Shroud only has 1 mana in the pool, so I think Kurt was contemplating using a repeal, but still just wants to sit for the time being.
Electromancer was the draw for Shrout. He is trying to look for something like Past in Flames at some point here. Blue-red was made off the mana Morphos. And he'll go for second mana Morphos, triggering on Ascension, and now Kurt has to make a call. Looks like the call is going to be repeal. Well, Cyclonic Rift. We'll go with the other bounce spell. So Shrout spending blue-red to make blue-red. Now can draw a card off his mana Morphos. Found Sleight of Hand.
Those little mana tokens you see on the screen, a recent inspiration after covering an SCG Open where someone had something very similar. It was very helpful for tracking the mana floating, which can be complicated for the viewers at home sometimes. So
a lot of payoff, but Shrout's kind of missing he's missing some of the glue that holds us together. Namely, he's really missing Past in Flames. If he were to have one of those, he would be able to likely combo this turn. He has land 4, he can make an Electromancer, then he has 2 mana, Pyretic Ritual would put him up to 4. Got a lot of plays. He's just gonna recast Pyromancer Ascension. It does not look like he has the setup that he needs right yet. And I'll go for a Sleight of Hand again, getting a counter back on his Ascension. The good news for Shrout is that I'm not positive that Kurt's making a ton of progress here either.
right, and you see Gifts Ungiven here, and that could be a path for Shrout to go pass the turn, gifts, and then try to go for the kill the following turn, assuming that Kurt's putting him under very little pressure.
Well, if Andrew just continues to make his land drops every turn, eventually, if he just gets a Past in Flames in his yard, or really in his hand, it doesn't matter which place it is, he can just start the combo off that and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing he does have to worry about, well, actually, doesn't have to worry about out of the blue Tron list. Out of regular Tron, red-green Tron, what you have to worry about is 4 main deck copies of Relic of Progenitus. They're actually very strong here. But the blue-green Tron actually doesn't run that one here, so Kurt doesn't have a way to go after Andrew's graveyard.
And Condescend, a pretty big pickup here for Kurt. Sitting with a pretty healthy amount of protection here in the Oblivion Stone. It doesn't necessarily stop Shrout from going off, but it does make things quite a bit more complicated. Backing that up with a counterspell is really nice. The question is, at what point does Kurt lower his shields a little bit and get something onto the table? Because he can't sit here all day.
No, if you give the Storm player enough time, he will put a win together. He's going to go play Breeding Pool. That puts his mana count up to 9. Does have access to double blue.
Yeah, allows him to cast both Repeal and Condescend in the same turn.
Play mana 9 and just pass back. Shrout will fetch out second Steam Vents on the end step. go back over to Andrew's turn. He does have. It seems to me like he's building up toward a Past in Flames, or hoping to find one.
Well, with gifts, he can set it all up, I'm sure.
Yep. Draw for the turn was a copy of Jataxian Probe. He has one of those in the graveyard. Casting it would almost certainly force action from Kurt. And that's going to be the play. He goes to 11, attempts to puts an Ascension trigger on the stack, and that'll get rid of the Oblivion Stone. But he'll get to see what he's up against. Condescend, Repeal, Ugin, and Urza's Tower.
It's been pretty fascinating. I mean, compared to covering a match of Legacy Storm, a lot of what's going on here is on the board. It's not just about what's in players' hands.
Yeah, the modern Storm deck does rely on the board a lot more. It to me always feels like it's more of a setup. It's much less of an all-in deck. It's really just trying to get one of its two engines running, and then it just really goes off big.
Yeah, when you don't have access to Dark Ritual, it changes the way that you have to build, your Storm decks.
The rituals by themselves aren't any good. They need an enabler, whether it's Past in Flames or Electromancer or Ascension, to actually start doing unfair things.
Yeah, Desperate Ritual and Poetic Ritual, they're anemic. I mean, they function, but they're pretty anemic. Seething Song, not allowed in the format, so the power of the deck is coming from other things.
And the draws for Andrew have been less than ideal. That Jataxian Probe found a third copy of Goblin Electromancer. If you're Andrew, you may get to the point here where you just start jamming all your Goblin Electromancers. You know that Kurt actually can't kill them all.
Well, I mean, Kurt still has the Ugin in hand, and Ugin can just minus and clean. So
right, but then he has to pay for, the Ugin. You need to get Kurt to play that Ugin at some point. Andrew's going to go for one Electromancer here. Kurt holding the spell on the stack at the moment.
Yeah, Andrew's in this weird jam where he needs to put enough on the table where it's attractive for Kurt to play Ugin minus and lower the shields, but not so good that Shrout doesn't have enough backup to win the game with after the fact.
Well, he's just dumping. His hand right now is two Ascensions and 3 Electromancers, or 1 Ascension and 3 Electromancers. So he just has this glut of the 2-mana sorcery enabler cards, so he's just going to throw a lot of them out and hope that one of them hopes to just get Kurt's hand lower on answers. End step, Kurt will repeal the Pyromancer Ascension. He drew a Snapcaster off the repeal, and his draw for turn was Thirst for Knowledge, so 2 pretty good pickups for Kurt. And this will be Ugin the Spirit Dragon. He will plus it to deal 3 to the Electromancer.
And I think this is, Kurt wants to try to get to the ultimate here as fast as he can, because that actually may allow him to win the game. And so instead of playing the Ugin and minusing, he'd rather cycle the repeal, get Ugin to play, start plussing it, and try to get to the ultimate in 2 turns.
Yeah, and with 4 mana up here, he does still have that Condescend available. Andrew drawing a fetch land for the turn.
There's for Knowledge. And at this point, you feel like it's just a race for Mindslaver. Ultimate with Ugin isn't guaranteed to win, but if he does find Mindslaver, that's going to do it. Very hard for Shrout's deck to beat that happening.
Yeah, when you control Storm players' turn, you can make them make a ton of horrible plays. And Shrout will go for another Electromancer. If this sticks, it will give him enough mana to end step Gifts Ungiven.
And this doesn't feel like the spot where you pick a battle if you're in Kurt's position. You have an Ugin in play, you're already planning on plussing with it the next turn.
Yeah, both copies of, so he has Condescend in hand, that's really his interaction right now. And he's going to Thirst for Knowledge in response here. You see Shrout may build the stack even bigger. See fetching for Island. Only 3 basics in Shrout's deck. They're all in play at the moment. Relevant because only 3 copies of Steam Vents, so he only has 1 other fetchable target. And it'll be Gifts Ungiven on end step for Shrout. And this is, so, let me back up. The Goblin Electromancer is cast. Andrew passed the turn. Kurt went for an end step Thirst for Knowledge, and now Shrout is going for Gifts Ungiven while there's no Condescend up.
Yeah. But this is going to be really hard for Shrout to get through the next turn because he's looking at Condescend plus potential other disruption as well. Snapcaster Mage also is available to get back something like Repeal or Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's going to be a pretty big wall for Shrout to fight through. Not to mention that his Electromancer is not long for this game.
Yeah.
Kurt's still at a healthy 18. Looks like it's going to be Pyretic Ritual, Past in Flames, Goblin Electromancer, and Manamorphose.
Yeah, the Past in Flames is what makes the gifts piles very complicated, because on one hand, you don't want to give them, you don't want to put Past in Flames in the graveyard because it's still a spell they can cast. By the same token, it's very hard to start priming the pump with Past in Flames out of the graveyard. It's so much more expensive. But sometimes, even though it's a flashback cell, putting it in the graveyard does enough to slow down the Storm player's ability to go off.
So it's about 1 either way. So each of the rituals is +1 mana, both the Desperate and Pyretic Ritual. And putting the Past in Flames in the hand is +1 mana versus because it's 1 more expensive in the graveyard. So I want to say all of them lead to the same spot, no matter which way Kurt gives him the 3 red cards. Now the interesting thing is what Kurt chooses to do with the Goblin Electromancer, whether he wants Shrout to have another Electromancer in hand or wants him to give him double Ritual in hand. Andrew's certainly going for basically all the mana payoffs that his deck has.
Mm-hmm.
And Kurt's going to give him both of the rituals.
And I think the reason to give both the rituals there is that if Shroud's hand is in a position to go off, then Electromancer is worth more mana than any of the rituals.
Yeah, not to mention the rituals represent a strategy where Shrout builds toward 1 big spell, more so than the other cards, and Kurt does have a counter spell for it. The Condescend, with the amount of mana Kurt has, is a hard counter if he needs it to be.
Right.
Kurt uses Ugin to blow up the Electromancer. It's now in range of using its ultimate next turn.
And Kurt has picked up another blue source of mana. He's got Remand, Condescend. He's got some cover here. He can fight Shrout if Shrout makes a big move.
Does look like game 1 here could be sealed up this turn. So 11 counters on the Ugin. Andrew is going to have to go up this turn. He doesn't want that -10 ability to happen, but Kurt has a pretty big wall up. Andrew's hand has an Ascension, an Electromancer, a couple rituals, and a Grave Shot. 3 rituals, actually, and a Grave Shot. Past in Flames is in the yard. Shrout's going to lead on Goblin Electromancer. Besides, Electromancer looks like it's going to resolve, and as soon as that's resolving, Shrout's going to try to burn through as many of these rituals as he can before it's off the table. So he'll start with Desperate Ritual. That will get him up to 3 red.
And I think the Remand sitting in the hand here, that using it on the Goblin Electromancer is a little bit attractive because it forces Shrout to use 2 mana to redeploy. But I think that Remand is probably on Past in Flames detail at this point.
Have to agree. Pyromancer Ascension, the next play from Shrout. He's now down to 1 red in his mana pool. Is this time where Kurt uses one of his control spells? Well, that one's really cute. I like the storm counter.
Pyromancer's Ascension is also a fairly juicy remand target, because if Shrout has to spend mana redeploying it, then it's hard to imagine he can do a lot of damage with it. Maybe he can if his hand's kind of rolled up the perfect way, but...
So if you're trying to deny Shrout mana, which is what you're doing, I think the remand is just going to hit Past in Flames and nothing else. Unless there's a danger of Shrout actually activating this Ascension, then you have to change how you do the game plan.
Exactly, or just winning out of his hand.
All right. So Pyretic Ritual to play from Shrout. He did not have one of those in the graveyard. If he did, so that's pretty relevant right now. He does have another one in hand, it looks like. But I don't know if he has the second spell to put another counter on the Ascension.
And I think that's part of the reason that Kurt decided not to remand there. The odds that Shrout had a hand that could really follow up, it would have to be full of cantrips. And at that point, Shrout probably doesn't have enough mana to do something that powerful this turn.
Yeah, goes for second Pyretic Ritual, goes for a counter on the Ascension. Well, if Shrout had enough ways to activate the Ascension, then he would have the ability here to cast and copy Past in Flames, which actually Kurt's double counterspell still would get around. So now Shrout's going to have to go for the Past in Flames. Costs 4. That's going to get remanded. And now, no Past in Flames for Shrout. He has a Grape Shot, but that's not going to be good enough.
Right. He can Grape Shot the Ugin down to a point where Kurt can't go ultimate with the next turn, but that doesn't even matter. The writing's on the wall. The writing's on the wall. Kurt can untap and minus away the board, leave Shrout with no resources, and he's just going to give it up.
Yeah, if he could have got enough Storm to get the Ugin off the board, you may have seen Shrout continue to play that one. But as it is, game one goes over toward Kurt Spiess. In a game where I actually felt like Storm was pretty advantaged there, I was drawing Shrout. I felt like got a little unfortunate with his draws. He was pretty heavy on Electromancers there.
Exactly. In this kind of matchup, Kurt's deck's not very good at interacting with spells. He does have some counter spells, but the board is something he can definitely interact with. Andrew drew a lot of copies of Pyromancer's Ascension and Goblin Electromancer, and Kurt, as you saw, was able to pretty easily fend those off with Sweepers, Ugins, Repeal, Cyclonic Rifts. It's not the part of the deck that Shrout's hoping to draw. All
right, well, for those of you joining us, this is our first ever SCG Modern Open, but it's not only our first Modern Open, it's also our first Open of the month of March, which for those of you in Star City Games Game Night means this is a new month of Game Night promos. You notice that on our jackets, we are wearing the one for March, which is going to be the Rat token, as you see here on the screen. It's part of the Star City Games Creature Collection. Game Night run at stores all around the country. It can be any night of the week. Prizes given away like this pin and this adorable little rat token that you see here on the screen.
Well, the image on the Creature Collection for the rat is quite endearing. The pin, slightly more gruesome. So again, an interesting juxtaposition. This is the March kit that you see in front of you. Too late to get signed up for March, obviously, but if you want to get signed up for the April kit, head over to starcitygames.com/game-night or contact your Star City Games organized play representative.
All right, well, looking at their sideboards, I want to go to Ender Shrouts first, because we saw he played Gifts Ungiven game one, which if you're Kurt, may cue you off to what's going on here.
Yeah.
He does have a package of Gifts Ungiven, Unburial Rites, Elesh Norn, Iona in his sideboard. That said, I am not positive we're going to see him go to that this match.
I actually think he's best served just bringing in his 3 copies of Blood Moon and calling it a day. I wouldn't want to go to Empty of the Warrens because Kurt's deck's pretty effective at fending off permanents with Oblivion Stone and Ugin and so forth. But Blood Moon, very potent against Kurt if it resolves. His deck all about getting Tron into play, and if he can't do that, it's very hard for him to beat Shrout.
Yeah. Going over to Kurt's deck, what does he have as far as hate cards for Storm?
Well, he doesn't have anything I would call a hate card, but his sideboard is 4 copies of Tarmogoyf, 3 Dispels, 3 Nature's Claims, 3 Spellskites, a Hurkyl's Recall, and an Engineer Explosives. And I can definitely get behind bringing in Tarmogoyf for some additional pressure, and the 3 Dispels counter a ton of the action in Shrout's deck. So I think those 7 cards are easy to bring in. He can get away from some of the more clunky, board control-oriented cards that he has, like All Is Dust. Oblivion Stone is questionable here. I don't know if he wants to go for some sort of loam package, slow for this matchup. So he's definitely got stuff to cut. And I think the additional pressure, Tarmogoyf, and some more counter spells and Dispel, very solid 7 cards to bring in.
Yeah, even just changing up his removal suite, he also has a copy of Engineered Explosives in his sideboard. Most of Andrew's payoff permanents are 2 mana cards. That certainly could go do some damage as well.
Yeah, although I think Engineered Explosives is a little rough in this matchup because if you want to set it for 2, Kurt's deck does not necessarily have access to two different colors of mana early on in the game. He plays one basic, and then he's trying to get to Tron. And so if you want explosives for 0 or for 1, I think it's potent in Kurt's deck. Once you start talking about having it for 2 and needing it early on in the game, I think it's a lot more questionable.
Yeah, so it's just the ability to set it on 2 at a relevant point is not easy for his deck.
Well, if the matchup was a bunch of slower 2-mana cards you want to interact with, I'd said go for it. But in this matchup, if Electromancer hits the table, Shrout needs to kill it that turn. It's not like you can kill it 2 turns down the road. And because his deck is not that well equipped to get 2 different colors of mana into play early on in the game, it means I think Explosives is poor here. Now, if he wants some insurance against the Empty the Warrens kill, it's possible it comes in. But I think his deck is generally well suited to handle that sort of thing. I would be surprised if Andrew even brought it in.
Yeah, he is banking on his cards. He has 2 copies of Spell Snare, 2 copies of Repeal, and 2 copies of Cyclonic Rift, and they really do have to do a lot of work against those early 2-drops from Shrout.
Right. There's a lot of pressure on her early on in the game to be able to interact. Not easy for his deck to do, but he needs to be mullining aggressively for those kind of counter spells.
Yeah, you saw game 1 because Kurt was on the play. He was able to remand Andrew's turn to Electromancer, but if you switch who's on the play that game, things look pretty grim for Kurt.
Definitely. I mean, every constructed format is about the play and draw to some extent. Some formats and matches magnify it more than others. One of the cards that is so much better on the play than on the draw is Remand. Just an entirely different animal.
Let's see here. Both players currently 2-0 right now. We're seeing Bluetron versus Storm. Bluetron has actually picked up some popularity recently. Normally, it is the less popular of the 2 Tron decks. You'll see Red-Green Tron be the pretty go-to one. But Bluetron's, I would actually say right now in the metagame, this may be the more popular Tron deck.
Well, I mean, if you want to improve your matchup against something like Splinter Twin, having blue cards is a way to do it. Definitely more potent than anything that the Red-Green build brings to the table.
Shrout keeping on his 7s. Kurt is going down to 6.
I believe 5 now.
Will be tougher. Unlike its green, the green version, the blue-green Tron deck seems to care about its quantity of cards a little more. It's doing a lot more trading as opposed to establishing one big trump spell.
And there's just less redundancy with the ways to search for your Tron pieces. The Red-Green builds play a lot of cards like Ancient Stirrings and Sylvan Scrying on top of Expedition Map. The Blue-Green deck is trying to say my counter spells are going to buy me the time. My card drawing, which is slower, is going to give me the opportunity to get to my Tron pieces, but not quite as fast as the green builds do.
Yeah, it's not as good at finding Tron. See Kurt on to 4. It is really just the Expedition maps that help him put it together.
I mean, cards like Thirst for Knowledge do a lot of work too. There's 2 copies of Sylvan Scrying, but he has green mana early on a little less reliably than the red-green builds of the deck do.
Yeah, it doesn't have that suite of chromatic spheres and stars to help him get the green mana online.
Yeah, all those deck slots are being absorbed by counter spells.
4 cards. Spotted a tower and an expedition map for Kurt. That's probably all he needs to see to keep the hand.
Yep. A snap of the fingers, snapping that hand off, and we're on our way.
4 cards. We'll see if Kurt gets to play this game. Andrew on the play here is going to start off turn 1, fetching a Steam Vents down to 17, firing off some sort of cantrip. And not much care for his own life total in this matchup.
No.
For Shrout. Draw off Serum Visions, draws a Desperate Ritual, Unburial Rites, and Island on the top. So he has gone for the Unburial Rites gift package.
Empty the Warrens in his deck as well.
Yeah, now knowing Shrout and having talked to him about Storm, he is a player to board in Unburial Rites in nearly every matchup.
Just no one's expecting it, and they're going to have hate for your spells, but the graveyard's
whatever
unchecked.
hate they have, it's probably, everybody has some sort of hate. And when things, one of the best ways to get around people messing with your Storm combo is to simply do it a turn faster, which Empty's much better at doing. Turn 2 Electromancer from Shrout. It's going to go uncontested. Kurt with a Tower, Breeding Pool, and Map. Not bad for a 4-card hand. Looks like he has a Mindslaver to build up to, and a Nature's Claim out of the board.
Yeah.
Third land from Shrout. Electromancer will swing Kurt down to 16. Andrew's hand is empty, empty, desperate ritual, gifts ungiven. So he'll start with Desperate Ritual. That's first card of the turn. Goes up to 3 red mana. And he's going to floating 1 red mana, cast Gifts Ungiven. Remember, gifts only costing 3 thanks to Goblin Electromancer.
And I'm assuming this is a spot where Shroud is looking to get some ritual effects here to keep going and empty for a bunch.
Yeah, I believe it'll just be all his rituals into Past in Flames. And it looks like you're seeing Pyretic Ritual, Desperate Ritual, Manamorphose, Past in Flames as the 4 cards he's going to get. So just gifting for a lot more mana.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of, I think, what I want to point out where I said a turn 2 Goblin Electromancer can just be so powerful. If you look at how many spells the Electromancer is going to discount this turn, it's already done it for 2. He's already made 2 mana this turn. The Electromancer is liable to make 7 mana for Shrout this turn.
And the damage not trivial when he's going for an Empty the Warrens kill either.
Yeah, he may actually go for a Grape Shot kill here. So he could make a lot of mana, cast all these spells, then flashback his past, then cast Past in Flames, and actually flashback that Gifts Ungiven to then go get the Grape Shot.
Yeah.
So Desperate Ritual and Manamorphose in the graveyard. Kurt giving Andrew the least amount of mana possible. He gave him the Past in Flames and a Pyretic Ritual. 1 red floating for Shrout. He has made a land drop this turn, I believe. Can go. Yeah, he'll go ahead and go up to 3 mana off Pyretic Ritual. And 1 more Desperate Ritual. That will put him up to 5. That will give him enough to start some Past in Flames.
Yep. Has a mana left over and all this. Still a land untapped, and
yeah,
he can get the ball rolling yet again.
2 mana left over, actually. So his Past in Flames only costing 3 thanks to Goblin Electromancer. It's a 5th spell of the turn. Everything gaining flashback. He does have 5 rituals in his graveyard, which he can now fire off. So that'll put him up to 10 cards for the turn. Gonna start by. Looks like he's going to go ahead and cast a Manamorphose here. So Manamorphosing a red into double blue. That'll draw him a card. It's a Serum Visions. No need to get too fancy. He'll continue casting rituals. Casts 3 more rituals out of the graveyard, each of them netting him 2 mana. So that will put him up to 9 red and 10 spells for the turn. Now we can see Gifts Ungiven again.
Yep.
The question is if he still actually has a Grape Shot in his deck. So he'll go for Gifts Ungiven. That's going to cost 1 blue and 2 red. 11th spell of the turn down to 1 blue and 7 red mana. And now, presuming we see Grape Shot in these 4 cards, it doesn't matter whether it goes to hand or graveyard. That should be enough. He shows the Grape Shot. And going to throw some rituals in with it for good measure.
Yeah, same deal as before.
Because he can flashback that Past in Flames, it's not going to matter where the Grape Shot goes. So, a ritual and the Manamorphose. A Grape Shot and Manamorphose go to the yard. Shot continuing the turn. He's going to have to storm up to 17. He Jataxian probes, sees the coast is clear. Now actually learns about the sideboarded Nature's Claim.
Pretty valuable to know. If
Yeah.
Shrout was on the fence about whether or not he wanted Pyromancer's Ascension, now it likely will get away from it.
So go ahead and draw a card off that one. That's his 12th spell. Casts Pyretic Ritual. Spell number 13, 9 red and 1 blue. And he's going to go ahead and flash back that Serum Visions. That was still there from the first copy of Past in Flames. You notice that he has the sideways cards in his graveyard. Those are the cards that still have flashback. Though, to be fair, the Past in Flames doesn't have flashback. So the face-up ones are the ones that did not get flashback when he first cast his Past in Flames.
Yeah, this is all elementary at this point, as Shrout has more than enough resources to work with here for the Grape Shot kill.
Spell 15 there, and once he shows Kurt spell 15, spell 16 will be the Past in Flames, and 17 will be the Grape Shot. That's Kurt's life total. And we are on to game 3. Shrout with a turn 3 kill on the play on the back of Goblin Electromancer.
Pretty impressive stuff, and the rituals in this deck look pretty anemic, but when the Goblin Electromancer is involved, now all of a sudden Heretic Ritual and Desperate Ritual start looking like Dark Ritual, and suddenly you have a real Storm deck.
Yeah, and that is really, I suppose, that is the big difference between the two, is that this one you have these bad rituals you have to upgrade into legacy playable rituals.
But you're also not playing against Force of Will, so there's benefits in both directions.
I do want to point out something that Shrout did at that game. He made great effort to not show, he showed Kurt Gifts Ungiven, but Kurt, I knew about that from game 1. He did not show Iona, he did not show Unburial Rites, he did not show Empty the Warrens. And he had all 3 of them at some point.
Yeah. No, being able to conceal that is so valuable for Andrew. Because it's an entirely different dimension of attack.
You know, and as we were saying, you were looking at the sideboard and you were saying, if I'm Shrout, I don't even go for Empty the Warrens, right? You're saying, let's just keep with the game 1 plan. So it's a very reasonable thing if you're Kurt to just not know whether there's going to be an Empty. And it could affect, maybe Kurt boards out most of his sweepers.
Yeah.
You know, if Kurt is on the fence about a card like Engineered Explosives, maybe he leaves it in the board.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's always challenging playing against Storm because you have these sideboard cards that are good against a class of their combo and not good against another class of their combo. You know, Nature's Claim is a great example of this, where if Shroud's on Pyromancer's Ascension, great, and if not, it's not really doing anything. I think that part of the reason Kurt has brought it in is probably a hedge against Blood Moon as well. If he can leave a green up, then he can get it off the table in response. Pretty important for his deck to do.
Yeah, and I do think Shrout has already gotten away from his copies of Pyromancer Ascension. So the Nature's Claims may just not be live here.
Well, I have to imagine Andrew has left in his Blood Moon, or brought in the Blood Moons. So
Okay,
they're live in
so
that.
they're live
They're
there,
live
yeah.
in that respect.
And that's actually a pretty good point. Yeah, Shrout probably wants to boards out the Ascensions here because of the amount of bounce that Kurt has. In addition to the fact that Nature's Claims are probably in the sideboard.
No.
We saw game 1, it was either 2 or 3 occasions that Shrout would have a trigger on the stack for the second Ascension, and then Kurt would would somehow remove the Ascension in response. I think that's a story that would continue to repeat itself. We do see actually Ascension though in Shrout's openers. He's kept some number of them in. Along with Iona, not a card he really wants to see.
Yeah, and not there to be drawn. Though I suppose with enough rituals and
Metamorphosis,
it's not impossible. Not impossible.
I
but
hope that story's happened at some point. I have never gotten to do that, but that sounds amazing.
Just saying, don't rule it out. It is castable.
He does play 3 copies of Faithless Looting, so...
You got a Hallowed Fountain in the deck. That's a,
Oh, wow, now we only have to have 2... Only just 1 Metamorphose, actually, right? She's only triple white.
It's actually easy at this point.
Yeah.
It's basically easy, I would say.
It's 9, right? You have to ramp up to 9?
It's tough. It's going to be pretty hard.
She costs a lot.
It's not cheap. Locking your opponent out of the game is not cheap. Or shouldn't be, at least.
He's just going to condescend it. That's the word. When he remands that Iona, it's going to be just, you're going to have to rebuild, man.
Right.
It's going to...
Sad days.
Kurt has kept on 7 Shrout, surveying his 6. Not happy with it. May be able to keep it anyway. That's a no. He's going to be going down to 5. Well, after what was a competitive game 1, both players going to take turns battling through mulligans on the draw here. We'll see if Shrout can have some better luck. Kurt actually had a pretty decent mull to 4.
For a 4-card hand, you can't ask for a whole lot more.
Had a Tron piece, 2 lands, and an Expedition map.
But I think a hand with no counterspell, when he's on the draw, even if it's a 7-card hand, he's going to be hard-pressed to win.
I mean, the problem is Shrout was on the play and said keep. And you're like, well, that's okay. That's going to be bad. I would think that Shrout stands a better chance of winning on a mulligan here because say Kurt kept a hand, if Kurt floods, for example, Shrout, it doesn't matter that Shrout's down cards. He could just power through whatever removal Kurt has.
I think mulligans are almost always worse for Storm decks just because they're, critical mass style decks.
Yeah, they're not as bad as they would be. Like the modern one's a little more resilient because you have things like Pyromancer Ascension that can, if unchecked, just buy you a lot of cards. We will see Kurt's hand. He has kept a hand of, he had a land Expedition map turn 1. His other hand has 2nd Tron piece, land, Remand, Cyclonic Rift, Dispel. So he does have Tron, and he has pieces of permission.
I mean, this is a great hand here for Kurt. He has the ability to interact with something that enters play like Electromancer or Ascension with his Cyclonic Rift. He's got counter spells. It's a very solid hand here for Kurt.
Yeah. Andrew has a second Jataxian Probe, but he's going to save that one for the Ascension. He goes ahead and ships the turn. Kurt plays Misty Rainforest, passes back. Has Remand up. Desperate Ritual, the draw for Andrew. And it'll be, once again, Jataxian Probe. And Shrout does not hit land number 2, just has to pass the turn. Even with land 2, he would be hard-pressed to make an impact on this board.
Yeah. You'd have to wait and try to overpower in one turn because he doesn't want to play his spells incrementally into Kurt's counter spells. He wants to overload in one turn. So
he wants to force Kurt to leave up triple blue in every turn or something like that. Kurt draw was Breeding Pool, fetched for Breeding Pool as well. Here the second Tron piece, it's Urza's Mine. Shrout drawing Pyromancer Ascension, passes back, and Tower in Kurt's hand. He doesn't have the payoff spell just yet. So because he doesn't have his payoff spell, goes in and makes second blue for his counterspell insurance as opposed to making Tron.
Well, he did pick up a payoff spell here in Gifts Ungiven. It's not a payoff spell immediately, but
it will be one.
Yeah. I mean, at the pace that this game is going, it seems likely that Kurt will be able to get a Gifts pile that involves Academy Ruins plus Mindslaver, just establish the lock.
Well,
I assume that package is still in his deck. Don't know for sure, but
we saw the Mindslaver game too. Can't imagine you board out the Ruins if the Slaver's in.
Right, or the Gifts, and we see Gifts in his hand also, so.
Shrout finally does hit the second land, but as on turn 4, it may just be too late. Going to start with Pyromancer Ascension. If you're Kurt, you may just Gifts here and let that stick.
I think so too. Because Kurt's just on a race here to get to Mindslaver, at which point it doesn't matter what Shrout's done up until that point.
It's going to be Island, and that is absolutely what happens. Here's Gifts Ungiven. And we will see the gifts that he's going to select. Life looks like the Slaver lock you're talking about. Life from the Loam, Mindslaver, Spell Snare. Not switching back. Yeah, he does like the Spell Snare, though.
This might just be a guess for value here. He's looking at things like Thirst for Knowledge and Spell Snare. I like getting the luck going.
It does look like he picked Academy Ruins with the last one. So yeah, it's going to be Mindslaver, Loam, Spell Snare, and Academy Ruins. Well, he can't play in Kraken next turn. He only has 9 mana, so it's still a turn off.
But he has some counter spells to help.
Oh yeah,
tide
he's
him over.
Great. There you go. Slaver lock. This is the 3-piece lock there of Academy Ruins, Mindslaver, and Life from the Loam. It will take Kurt some time, but eventually he'll get all 3 of those.
Right. This is the reason this package exists in decks like this. It's impossible to keep someone off of Mindslaver over the long term because, the Loam gets back the land and the Ruins gets back the Mindslaver. So,
and the Loam gets back itself.
Right. It's only a matter of time. You can split the piles in different ways to try to keep Kurt off of mana or slow down the progress, but it happens eventually.
Giving them the Life from the Loam in their hand is the way to make it the slowest, which is what Andrew did that turn. But actually, by giving him Academy Ruins, Kurt's can just play Academy Ruins this turn and passes. Goblin Electromancer for Shrout. And that may be fine. Kurt will get to Slaver Andrew next turn.
And if Shrout makes any sort of follow-up move here, Kurt always has the option of using his counter spells or Cyclonic Rift to keep anything from too bad from happening.
Let's use Academy Ruins, put Slaver on top. Goes ahead and casts and cracks Mindslaver, so he'll get to control Andrew's next turn. And let me tell you, you can make Storm players do some damage to themselves.
This is going to be rough.
Andrew's hand, however, is pretty rough if you want to get to that point. 2 copies of Gifts Ungiven, 2 copies of Empty the Warrens, more copies of Pyromancer, 2 copies of Pyromancer Ascension. Andrew's hand's really terrible, actually.
I mean, you can get him to, basically burn off some rituals and gifts for nothing, or for 2 random cards in the graveyard. That's it's not Shrout loses the game, but it's pretty bad.
So he's going to burn the ritual and have Andrew gifts for some things. Just mill 2 cards out of his deck, which actually against a Storm player is non-trivial. They don't have that many payoffs. He may just search for some lands.
Oh, getting 2 steam vents here is so good.
They have the same name. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Never mind. A steam vent and a Shivan Reef then.
Just a million.
That's fine too.
Yeah, hold on. You can't get 2 steam vents.
Yeah.
Not allowed. They have the same name. Hold on. I mean,
yeah, we go get a Shivan Reef. This is the other line. This is the other line of play where you put some lands into the graveyard. You then keep ritualing. You grape shot away. If you can't kill Shrout, you can at least grape shot away his Goblin Electromancer.
Yeah, so he actually puts the lands in the graveyard, puts some rituals in Shrout's hand. Because remember, he decides both how to split the piles and how they're picked. He controls all of Shrout's decisions. So then he went ahead and cast the grape shot with that final mana, killing the Goblin Electromancer, milling Shrout lands, dealing some extra damage to Andrew, and that will be the turn.
Not shabby, and now Kurt gets his own turn. And now that there's a clock in play, I think this is too much.
Yeah, Tarmogoyf to play for Kurt. Kurt can even forget to put the Ascension counters on.
Yeah, Shrout could have hoped to maybe run out the clock for a draw, but now with the Tarmogoyf in play, Kurt's going to be able to win the game in time.
Tarmogoyf at a 5/6. Andrew's draw for the turn is Manamorphose. His hand is not going anywhere. He's going to play Manamorphose. And Kurt has no reason to not just counter everything at this point. Dispel takes care of Manamorphose, and that will be the match. Kurt Spiess, 2-1 is your winner over Shrout. Blue-green Tron into the 3-0 bracket.
Pretty impressive stuff. A matchup that you and I both felt was pretty bad for the Tron player. I still feel that way. Games 2 and 3, not the most informative as there was a lot of mulligans on both sides of the table, but you saw Kurt win game 1 straight up.
Yeah, an impressive game 1 for him.
Right, Andrew's draw was not great. As we mentioned, he had a lot of his permanents and not that much in the way of spells, but still.